But we would love to know a little bit more about you before we get into the RX story. So talk to us a little bit about where was Sam before RXBAR and how did you land at RXBAR?
Yeah. So I grew up in the western suburbs outside Chicago. Ever since I was a kid, I loved business. And when I graduated from college, the best way to pursue that was through finance. And so I started my career in finance doing healthcare M&A and pretty quickly realized I didn't want to stay in finance. It just wasn't, I had no edge. I wasn't going to be the best finance person. It just wasn't the right path for me. I learned that very fast. And so I called the guy who'd been a mentor for me, and he had found a home security business to buy. And it was a consumer business, direct-to-consumer home security concept, basically 100% digital. And so it was an interesting concept, and that was my first foray into operating and really entrepreneurship. So we bought a very small company west of Topeka in Kansas, rebuilt it as a completely new concept called LiveWatch Home Security, and had a great successful run there. Ultimately, that company was acquired by a strategic buyer, and I thought a lot of the concepts that we'd used at LiveWatch, I thought actually could apply well to a food company. And Jared and Peter, who we'll talk about, had founded RXBAR. And so that's how the conversation started, and that's how I ended up at RXBAR, was sort of talking through the connection between how we built a home security business and how it could actually apply to a food company. So I think we'll get into that. But.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know if all of you know this, but RXBAR is more than just bars, right? So they have grown to be an international company. They operate in the United States, Canada, and the UK. So they've got the bars, they've got nut butters, and they also have the RX Kid line. So if you haven't had an opportunity, you probably do on your chairs, but they're also in a store near you. So, all right, so what do you think? Could I be in sales?
You're doing great.
So you have this prior experience, and they start talking to you. So what was your first job? Did you have as an HR person, did you have a job description that you agreed to, or?
Yeah, so our first office was actually down the street, and this was before you all were here. So this is like maybe 10 blocks west of here, which I think is technically West Loop, but it's not like the cool part of West Loop that you guys work in. And we worked out of our warehouse. So we were surrounded by pallets. It was Peter, who's our CEO, Jared, who's Peter's co-founder, myself, and Jesse Stewart. And Jesse is also a childhood friend of ours. So all four of us have known each other since grade school. At that point, everyone's in sales because the only thing you're doing is thinking about how you get the brand out there and how you get the product in people's hands. Everyone's sort of in marketing, but marketing is really not, it's not a conceptual thing. It's really fundamentally to drive sales. It's like really cause and effect kind of marketing, not like brand building stuff. And then Peter and Jared had a lot of familiarity with the supply chain manufacturing process because they built the business manufacturing by hand. So long answer is not really. When there were four of us, everyone kind of did a bit of everything. And the business was very simple. It was make bars and sell bars. And that was basically it. And then like in between there, hopefully there's enough cash to buy enough raw materials to make more bars the next time. But that was essentially the business. And it was really not much more complex than that at the time.
So jack of all trades probably would have been at the top of that job description.
Probably everyone's job description back then, yeah.
So you talked about it started by hand. Say a little bit more about the innovation by hand part.
Yeah. So Peter's family's in the food space, and so he had deep intimacy with the food, just growing up with a family in the food business. And basically what Jared and Peter saw in the market was that there were clean bars, but there really weren't clean protein bars. So the question that they asked and the problem that they solved with RXBAR was, why isn't there a protein bar that's clean? And so the original way that they manufactured was taking a 5-quart mixer like you have at your house, putting in dates. At the time it was half a fig, some egg white, and then depending on the flavor, you would have almonds and blueberries, or you might have coconut or some cacao. All the chocolate flavors used to be called cacao. but no one knew what cacao was. So we started calling them chocolate. People would be like, what's cocoa? And we're like, all right, this is not good. But so they manufacture them by hand press them into bar molds, put them into resealable pouches, and then initially drove them around to CrossFit gyms in the area. And then later, in a next version of the business, actually shipped some product around the country to different CrossFit gyms mostly, and then direct to people's homes. But the business was built in its infancy on two guys hand forming with their thumbs protein bars.
Wow. That brings some interesting pictures to light, and probably some trial and error happened in that kitchen.
Yes,
if that
definitely.
kitchen could talk.
Yeah, Mrs. Rahal was, I still call her Mrs. Rahal because she was the first person fired from the company. She was putting front labels on both sides. So, but yeah, a lot of trial and error.
We did some HR early on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Very good. Well, that's fun. It's fun to see how it's all started. So, one of the biggest things that Peter Rahal, so the founder, talked about in an article recently with Forbes was just all the naysayers and all the challenges and people, all the doubters. So, you are just coming off of a pretty successful experience prior to joining RX. Do you recall kind of like how did you guys get over those hurdles? How did you get over that hurdle to join the organization?
Yeah. So it's actually become, so my first experience operating is in home security. And the home security company was like 50 miles, maybe 100 miles west of Topeka in Kansas. So how many people have been 100 miles west of Topeka in Kansas? Yeah, okay, so not a ton. So it's a small, rural area. And I still remember my wife was working for a private equity firm at the time, and I would go to their meetings, and private equity people are pretty cool. And so I would tell them, like, yeah, I sell home security systems from Topeka. And they're just like, wow, like, who is this loser? But it actually has become a filter for me. So I think any kind of early stage company or product, if it's not met with enough people that don't get it, or if it's not like kind of uncomfortable for you and a little bit embarrassing to explain what you're doing, probably too many people are already doing it. Yeah. And so when I think about LiveWatch, that was for sure true. And the same thing was true in a different way for RXBAR, where number one, the first reaction is like, why do we need another bar? There's hundreds of bars. And then from there, once you explain like, hey, there actually is a product position here, then it's like, okay, how are you gonna actually execute? None of you are from food, you don't know what you're doing. And then when it came to the packaging, this is my favorite one. So the packaging is what we're famous for now. We win awards for it. People are like, oh my God, the packaging's genius. And when we first did who's eaten them in the old packaging? There's probably like a couple. Yeah.
The resealable ones, right?
Yeah, well, the resealable were the first, and there's a second version. But if you look them up online, they're not good looking. And it was only because we were marketing to a very, very specific niche that it worked. But when we made that change, we showed people the new packaging that you see today. Everyone was like, this is the worst thing I've ever seen. They're like, this is terrible. We even showed it to retail buyers who we were ultimately gonna have to sell to. And they were like, we will never, I can't be clear about this. We will not take your product if it looks like this. And, but so it's just another example where we were so confident in it because we were so close to the consumer. And we were selling direct to consumer. We were taking their phone calls, answering their emails when they had problems. We were so tightly connected to the consumer that we knew that it would resonate. We knew it would work. So even in the face of people literally saying like, I'll never buy this product from you, we still did it. But I think it goes to the theme of like people who are doubters. Sometimes that can actually be a good signal. And
so how did you win the hearts and minds of the retailers that eventually clearly have bought some of your bars?
So ultimately, the retailers are servicing their customers. And so if there's enough customer demand, they're going to respond to it. And we knew our customers intimately. And when we think of customers, we think of individual people, not retailers. I mean, retailers are our customers too, but it really, the consumer. And so the consumer responded so well to the product. And our customers who were buying online or who were posting on Instagram, they loved it. You could just see that they were so excited about the packaging. And so eventually the retailers came around.
Yeah. numbers talk, right?
Yeah.
Let's be honest. So, I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head. Like, it was a really saturated market when you guys decided we're going to take up this charge.
Yeah.
So, like, did you ever imagine you'd be this successful? And what really, so the packaging is great, but what really distinguishes the RXBAR from you name it?
Yeah. So I think one of the key distinguishing, number one, the product does solve a clear problem. So Peter and Jared's insight was right that there wasn't a protein bar that was as clean as what you get out of, like, say, a Lara bar, which just doesn't have as much protein but is a clean product. So the first thing is the product it totally solved a problem. And we always talk about it now. If you're solving a problem with a product,
right,
you're running downhill. That is, like, essential. But then the big differentiating factor for us was that we spent about 2.5 years exclusively selling to CrossFit gyms, other fitness studios, and then direct to consumer. And so we understood our product's value from the perspective of our customers so intimately that we had a great instinct for the business. And it was because we were talking directly to the people consuming it. So if you think about, if you go a traditional route and you sell into grocery stores first, you're selling to a distributor and then a grocery store, and then someone's walking in and eating it. And most people, like, who's ever called an 800 number for a food product that you bought in the grocery store? Like, nobody. No one does that. So you don't get any feedback. And so we were so tight with the consumer that we understood it intimately. And so the big differentiating factor was when we went into the traditional channels in grocery, we went in a way that was speaking to our consumers really clearly, the packaging being the biggest form. So I think that was the biggest differentiating factor in the business. We thought it would be successful, but we never really, like, set out what are our expectations,
right,
but if you'd asked us 4 years ago, for sure this is faster and more successful than we would have bet back then, for sure.
So one last question related to the early days, and then we're going to move forward a little bit to kind of where you guys are today and what's happened in the last year or so. If you can, what were some of your earliest, like, just funny memories of, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we made that work, or oh my God, I can't believe I had to do this, but we pulled it off. Like, just what are some good memories from the early days?
So my favorite, and this speaks a lot to the company culture, but it's just also a good story. So we went to Expo West for our first time in 2015. And Expo West is the biggest food convention in the country. Every natural brand that you've ever heard of is at Expo West. I think 150,000 people were there last year. So it's like the Super Bowl of food. And so we're still in the old packaging. We have no retail distribution at this point because we're a .com business. And we're really thought of as a CrossFit brand by anybody who's heard of it. But most people just hadn't heard of it. So we're, like, not on the map at all. And we've rented this 10 by 10 space, and, like, Kind Bar next to us has, like, a city block, and there's, like, fireworks going off and roller coasters, and we're just like, oh my God, like, we were massively outgunned here. And so Peter and I flew in the day before, and we didn't even have a booth. So we had reserved the space, but we're just running so fast at that time that we didn't even have time to, like, design and build a booth. And so we had, like, a backdrop that had the bars and, like, a little, slogan or something like that. And we were like, all right, we'll fly into LA a day ahead and we'll build this booth. Like, we'll go to Home Depot and wherever else. And so we built a booth, and it was honestly decent. Like, it wasn't, you wouldn't be super impressed by it, but it wasn't terrible. And so the night before, we all huddled up, and so it was Jesse, Jared, Peter, and I at the time. And we huddled up, and we were like, all right, we don't really have that great of a booth. Nobody knows us. We have no retail distribution to speak of. But if we had walked the show the night before, another show that was adjacent, and we were like, if we bring good energy and we engage people and we share our product and we share the story and we're, like, genuinely, like, good to be around, it won't really matter what the booth looks like, right? And one of the key things, I see Megan smiling, she knows what I'm about to say. So one of the key things that we figured out was that when you walk up to people's booths, often they will look at your badge, figure out whether or not you're worth talking to, and then either talk to you or kind of like dismiss you. And we were like, God, that's like so rude. They're just sizing me up based on my title and company and whatever. And so we came up with this rule that morning. We were like, all right, we are not badge fucking people. Because like that's what's happening. They're badge fucking you and they decide whether or not they want to spend time with you. And so we're like, this is like a hard rule for the company, like no badge fucking. And so we have this little sign that hangs in our booths today that says no badge fucking with a little red thing. Am I allowed to swear here? Okay. This whole recording might be just thrown out. But
equal opportunity to anyone who came to your booth is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But so that was something like, number one, the scrappiness and entrepreneurial spirit to just like go out there and build this thing the day before, but then also to think about like, okay, who are we engaging and what's the right way to engage them, and remembering that every single person that we met was a potential consumer. Even if they weren't Kroger's buyer, they might be somebody who goes into a Kroger and buys bars, who ultimately is actually more important than Kroger's buyer anyways. So that's one of the early stories that I think like we still think a lot about.
Yeah, that's fabulous. Yeah. I love it. No, so, I think, right, humble roots, right? That's a theme here. And that's just what's so inspiring about this story is you guys were literally in the trenches, figuring it out as you were learning as fast as you were doing, right? And clearly some good learnings on that first trip. So let's talk a little bit more about the product. So we've talked about the packaging is amazing. It filled a need, so, and how have you guys kind of evolved the product when you think about innovation, specifically the bar, and kind of what's continuing to distinguish it in the market?
Yeah, so the bar itself is very close to the original formula. The big difference is we've replaced half a fig with cashews. And the reason for that was we kept hearing from consumers that, hey, it sticks to my teeth. Mm-hmm. And so one of the ways to help mitigate that was to replace fig with cashew. But in a larger sense, we're always looking at like, how do we make the product incrementally better? So we're always improving the bar. Even if the ingredient isn't changing, we're just thinking a lot about like, how do we make those small incremental improvements? And then when we think about new innovation, like the nut butters that were on your chairs, we really think about it from the same lens that we looked at the bar category, which is there a crowded category where there's an opportunity to add value? So adding protein into a category that maybe doesn't have that offering. Or is there an opportunity to add simplicity and simplify a category with a product like our RXBAR that was significantly simpler from an ingredient standpoint?
Got it. And so congratulations on the nut butter launch. It's been great. I'm pretty sure our family might keep it in business. But they're delicious. So please, everyone try them. They're fantastic. The market has changed. Consumers are changing, so there's a lot of GMO this, non this, non that, different diet trends, vegan, keto, all of those things. How are you guys thinking about that? What kind of approach are you taking?
Yeah, so our early adopters, many of them were either doing a Whole30, which is a type of nutritional reset. Maybe they're a paleo eater. So a lot of our early adopters, they are cutting edge eaters in the sense that they'll experiment with different diets and figure out what works well for them. Mm-hmm. So we definitely pay attention to it. Instagram's an amazing source of information when it comes to that. Like you can just see trends and you can see how people talk about it. So we watch it closely, but we don't overreact to any trend because, and the packaging actually reflects that. So it would have been very easy for us to put paleo on the front so that we would attract paleo consumers, or put gluten-free on the front so we'd attract gluten-free consumers. But we kept the labeling extremely simple because we wanted to appeal to people who wanted clean, simple ingredients. And our thought was, if you're a paleo consumer or a gluten-free consumer, you're going to see the ingredients and know that you can eat it. We don't really need to spell that out for you. And so we keep an eye on trends. We don't overreact to them, but we think generally the trend that's here to stay and will grow significantly is really just clean eating and whole food ingredients, really trying to simplify the foods that people are putting in their body. So we'll always be tied to whole foods,
Yeah.
clean, simple ingredients.
Yeah.
And sometimes we'll hit a trend, but it won't be intentional to just like chase a trend.
Sure, yeah. And talk to us a little bit, how do you guys come up with, the flavors, right? So pumpkin spice is the fall one, but talk to us a little bit about the innovation, and you guys have stayed pretty consistent on the core bar flavors. So what brings about, maybe let's introduce another flavor into the market?
So honestly, it's a lot of just internal experimentation. So
Okay.
we have a team at our office here in Chicago that experiments with different flavors. And one rule that has been a firm rule since day one is that it has to taste good. So we're not going to look at the category and say, hey, we're missing X, Y, or Z flavor, and just say we have to formulate that flavor and you have to get it out by March. It's really driven by the product. And because our roots are digital and direct to consumer and direct to independent, like CrossFit gyms, we don't necessarily build flavors for a retailer's reset schedule, which is a very common thing in big food companies. Once the food is ready and it tastes great and we feel really good about the product, we can launch it on our website before we go into a retailer. So the process is it's really designed around the food, and when something tastes great that we feel awesome about, then we'll launch it.
Got it. What are some favorite flavors in the audience? Who's a chocolate sea salt person? Peanut butter chocolate? That's me. Who's loving the new blueberry in the MKs? Yeah. What is the number one seller?
Chocolate sea salt. Yeah.
Sweet and salty. Gets us every time.
Yep.
So it's been a busy past year for you guys. I don't know if anybody's aware. We probably are, but you guys had a pretty successful 2017, being acquired by Kellogg's for a mere $600 million. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Something to be very proud of. But that's a big change. So my previous career was in CPG as well, and have gone through kind of the acquisition experience. And so we'd just love to hear your perspective. And Peter and Jared, what were you guys thinking when you thought about kind of going public and joining a bigger brand?
Yeah. The biggest thing that we were thinking about was values alignment. So we learned early in the business, so because we'd all known each other, we grew up together. It's kind of like you never sit down with your family and write out your core values. You know what I mean? They just sort of like are what they are, and everybody knows them. And that was how it was in the early days for us, because we'd all grown up together, so it was easy. But once we got to a certain number of people, we realized we really needed to be really thoughtful about core values and make sure that we all knew what they were. We were communicating consistently. We were hiring around it. We were firing because of it, promoting, all of that stuff. And so the same thing was true when we went through the sale process. We spoke with anybody that we spoke with. We were really clear about what our values were and that we felt like alignment was really important. And then Kellogg had experience with Kashi, where they bought Kashi and ended up integrating Kashi, sort of taking Kashi back out of Kellogg and making it a standalone. And through that process, they were really committed to keeping RXBAR as a standalone business. So that was a huge thing for us as we talked to Kellogg, is they had experience that they didn't want to repeat. And so they were really thoughtful about communicating with us about maintaining RXBAR's autonomy and ability to operate as a standalone business. So that was a huge thing.
Yeah. And so something that strikes me, you guys are so principled, and it's about what you guys really think and listening to your consumers. Becoming part of a much larger organization is really impactful, actually, to the consumer potentially. So how did you think about talking to your consumers as well as your employees who kind of started with this entrepreneurial, loved what they were doing, and significant change probably for them, even though you'd remained a standalone? How did you guys think about that communication?
Yeah, so it had to be, it's a tricky thing because you get a lot of advice on it and competing advice. But ultimately it came down to we had to be, so your values and your principles are tested not when things are easy and good, but when there's a tricky situation. And so we leaned on those, and we built a culture that's extremely transparent. We talk about authenticity a lot. And so it would have been totally against our culture had we showed up on a Thursday morning and been like, hey, Kellogg has bought us, the announcement's happening tomorrow. And so we brought the team along from the early stages. So everybody, and at that time we were 100 people or so. everybody knew about the process. We would update people on where the process was at generally without disclosing anything confidential. But we were really transparent with the team. I think way more transparent than a typical company is during an acquisition process. And so that was the biggest thing, was being transparent. And then we did the same thing with our customers. So we thought, the exact same thing. We're like, we're proud of this. We think it was good for the business. We think it was the right thing to do. And so why wouldn't we tell the most important stakeholder in the business, which is the people that eat the bars? And so we sent out an email that was so, just so on brand for us, that was just super direct. And I think the subject line was, Kellogg bought us, or something like that. But it was just super direct, and we weren't gonna hope nobody heard about it or something like that, because we were really proud of it. And so the whole process was really driven by thinking, how can we be totally transparent and authentic, and overall it was received really well.
Yeah, and that level of transparency, I think that's something that we share similarly here at Google. And so just curious, what were you guys looking for in deciding to join a larger organization? Assuming things are on scale, which we're experiencing as we continue to grow. But what has Kellogg brought for you?
Yeah, so I mean, they're 100-plus-year-old global. Kellogg was really one of the first food companies to be a global company, and so they have international expertise that's second to none, and in basically every corner of the world. And so they brought a global perspective that would have been really hard to build internally, really hard to build as fast as we needed to build it. So that's one of the biggest things, is they just bring an incredible global perspective for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And curious, what do you think you have brought to them, right? Because you guys have had some great successes and some learnings that a smaller group is able to kind of fail fast. And, again, former CPG, it's slower to respond to things.
Yeah.
So what do you think they're benefiting from having you under their wings?
Yeah. So Kellogg is used to operating in a world where the brands are huge and they're fully distributed and they're global. And most of our time, until the last 12 months or so, we were a small challenger brand that was coming into a set that was operated incredibly lean, and went to market in a unique way. And so when they're thinking about new brand launches, there's a lot that they're able to glean from us, because that's really where we're really strong.
Yeah. And, from what we've heard, it's gone really well, right? Which isn't always the case sometimes.
Yeah.
You're kind of the case study, the poster child for successful acquisitions. So, they've kind of allowed you to remain kind of your own operating business, if you will. But what else is going well, or what is a day like at RXBAR today, maybe different or similarly than it was a year ago?
Yeah. So it's different than it was a year ago, but not because of Kellogg. So Kellogg has been amazing in that they've really done everything that they said they would throughout the acquisition process, but the company's grown.
Yeah.
So the company's twice as big as it was when the acquisition happened, which was about a year ago. And so the day-to-day's changed just because we're a bigger organization. I mean, it's nothing like you all, but we have 250 people. We're now sold in international markets. There are more people on the team that have specialties than we've ever had before. So the business has changed, but it's all just sort of, it would have changed whether or not we were acquired by Kellogg.
Got it. And what are some challenges that you guys are maybe dealing with today that having greater scale has presented that 2 years ago wasn't something maybe even on your radar?
Challenges we're dealing with today because of scale?
Yeah, just as you continue to grow. It's not always easy.
Well, we have more customer stakeholders now. So we're sold in almost every retailer. We're sold in Canada, the UK, and working on more and more geos. And so the business just takes more coordination. Like if you picture when there were 4 of us in a warehouse, it's just easy because you know what everybody else is doing. And essentially there are company shared goals and there's 4 people. And so each of those 4 people have one top priority for the day, let's say. So you have 4 organizational top priorities. So once you have 250 people, now, even though everybody's marching in the same direction, there are more stakeholders and more
Sure.
people working on a project. So I
Yeah.
think the biggest change has been coordination internally.
Yeah. And so how has it changed how you've had to lead, or the leadership has had to lead the business differently?
Yeah. So in the early stage, I always think of it as a continuum, and there's like execution and strategy. And this isn't perfect, but in the early days, you're like 95 execution, 5 strategy. You know at a high level where you're going, but really all you're doing is executing. And then as the business grows, you have to spend more time on strategy,
Right.
because now you're driving a much larger organization towards a goal. And so that we've definitely shifted a bit more and added more strategic long-term thinking. But I'd say that's probably the biggest difference.
Yeah, interesting. It's a different muscle, right? I mean, you're growing in your leadership, the whole team.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it's been a pretty interesting journey. Hopefully you have some good HR around you.
Yeah, and as a leader, it's different because you go from being able to touch everything to almost being able to have your hands on nothing almost.
Yeah, you have to let go and delegate.
Yeah, and so you have to be able to trust your team, empower them, but you just can't, you literally can't micromanage it. And so I think that's one of the hardest things as a leader, is making that transition from, hey, I get to put my head down and just go do stuff. And doing stuff gives you instant gratification. Like, you go and sell it into a Costco region and they say yes, and you're like, yes, like in the moment, But the other side of it, you get very little instant gratification, and it's almost all setting things in place to hopefully make things work 6 or 12 months from now. And so that's a very different thing. And especially just that feedback loop is a little harder to digest, honestly, because the instant gratification feels good.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of while we're on the topic of just people and talent, we'll come back a little bit more to the product and the business. My understanding is that you guys take your talent and the development very seriously, which is something that's really important to us at Google. But I hear you've got some interesting, maybe people, talent development practices at RX that would be interesting for the group, I think, to hear in terms of, so we're on the topic a bit of transparency.
Yeah. So as I sort of briefly mentioned before, we got to a stage where we could feel like, wow, we've outgrown our clothes, basically. And a lot of it was people who had previously been working seamlessly. All of a sudden it was like, man, this just doesn't feel as smooth as it once did. And so we brought in a coach who started out as an executive coach. And the first thing that she did was had us take a tool called DISC, which is kind of a community. I see some nods, so maybe you guys have tried it, or used it. You guys
personality profile.
Yeah.
Some groups.
And it's like a lot of it, it's personality profile, but a lot of it's tied into communication. And so that was the first thing that helped us take a step back and sort of look at the team and the way it was built and say, okay, I can see where we might have some gaps because we have all drivers and no people who are like detail oriented and slower, right? And that's not exactly what we had, but you could start to see where the holes were in the organization. Yeah. And so that was the first time that we used it. But what that started was we focus a lot on the individual employee, what they're naturally really good at, how they show up, and what are the areas that they need to be aware of as derailers. And so as a part of that process, we want people to be vulnerable, because you sort of have to be in order to really understand because the way you work and you as a human is being put on this piece of paper, and it's kind of unnerving. And so you have to build an environment where people are vulnerable enough to receive that openly and then act on it, and then hopefully share it and be transparent enough with it to use it and let the other people around them use it. And so one of the ways that we were talking about it, and one of the things that everybody who has a direct report has one-on-ones weekly with them. And we sort of felt like, one-on-ones and reviews are probably just not going as well as they should be. And part of it's probably because new managers are uncomfortable giving tough feedback. Probably people are not that good at receiving it, but there's this feedback loop problem. And so Peter and I were like, all right, what if we just do my annual review in front of the whole company at an all hands meeting? Because there couldn't be a more public way
Vulnerable.
to do my review. And also, so in addition to me just like putting my money where my mouth is and say like, hey, you should be open to this and you should share your flaws and be open with them, open with the team about them. It also showed them that like I have legitimate weaknesses and like legitimate areas where I had to improve. And so it was really good and it was amazing afterwards. So many people came up and were like, that was amazing. Like, and we actually had one guy in the room who's from Kellogg, and he was like, that was ridiculous. He's like, you would never have seen that like at a bigger company. And so it was really, really effective in getting the idea that like being vulnerable is okay and everybody's got pretty decent sized weaknesses.
So who's signing up for that next time around? Anyone? No? Okay. Well, we'll come back to that. So let's switch back a little bit more to kind of the market and what's going on in the industry. So, technology is changing things. So let's talk a little bit about kind of, e-commerce, club, traditional. How are you guys going to market a little bit differently and how are you thinking about some of those things?
Yeah, so our route to market was different. So we started with e-com and we started with building relationships direct to CrossFit gyms and things like that. And so that's something that's very hard to go backwards and do because no matter what, Costco is going to be a bigger revenue driver than one CrossFit gym. And so it's really hard for companies to go the opposite way. Once they've already built their Kroger business and Costco business and Walmart business, I haven't seen any companies go backwards and decide like, hey, we need to invest in individual points of distribution that we're going to ship directly to. So the big thing is that foundationally we're built completely, call it upside down compared to what a normal food company is built. And so we still think about distribution in that same way, which is first it's the person that's going to eat it. So we think about them before we think about the retailer that ultimately gets them the product. And so when we roll out new products, we will go bottoms up. So we'll sell it in our direct to consumer first. We'll sell it to our CrossFit gyms and other independents. And we'll bring it out to retail quicker than we did for the bars. But we still think about it in the sense that it has to service the person eating it. It doesn't do anybody any good to do a massive launch in all retailers until you know that the product's going to be well received. It just doesn't make sense. So we still think about it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes good sense. So let's bring it home and look what's coming down the line. What does the future look like? You guys, I think one of the things you're best known at is like you see the white space before any of us as consumers are probably even thinking there's a problem. And so you've really led some incredible trends. So what's on the whiteboard at the office and ideas we should be thinking about?
Yeah, so when we think about the future, the way we think about it is that the way that we went to market and the way that we've built the business, which is also a bit unique compared to most food companies where finance, supply chain, and sales have an equal seat at the table with marketing. Traditionally in big food, marketing is really, it's really general management in most food companies. But so we think that there's opportunity to leverage the team that we've built and bring in more brands that are leading edge in their category and where we think the consumer's going. And so by this time next year, if we execute well, the team that's leading RXBAR should also be managing other brands too.
Okay. You can't tell us anymore about that, can you? just thought I'd ask. And so as you think about that, the company is going to continue to grow. How do you make sure you keep the center of gravity in terms of values and?
Yeah, I think it's the hardest thing to do, honestly. So scaling a business, the hardest thing to do is to keep the ways of working and the values and the principles, keeping them true and alive. So we try to do it in a bunch of different ways. The onboarding process, when you join RXBAR, you spend 2 weeks in customer service. And the rationale there is when we were back at the old office, everybody was in customer service because we all had phones at our desk. And when someone called the 800 number, everybody's phone rang. And we had a rule that it was one ring. It had to be answered before that second ring. And you would see people all the time running across the room to go pick up a phone. If we had an all hands meeting, which was 6 people,
I was gonna say, good thing it was a small
somebody
room.
was like next to the door to man the phones. And so we try to keep a lot of that stuff relevant, like the badge example that I gave, just in case they have to cut out that segment. You guys know what I'm talking about. stuff like that. So we try to keep a lot of those principles relevant in the way that we work, the way people are brought into the company. But it's really tricky. It's really hard.
Yeah, I know, absolutely. And it's one of those things you just have to continue to refresh them, and you have to continue to practice them as leaders, and ultimately it's every employee's accountability to live them. So, in 5 years, 10, what kind of company is RXBAR going to be?
So it'll be a global multi-brand company that the hope is that actually we learned a lot from you all. So OKRs was a concept that I know you guys are familiar with. And so when we think about running the business, that's one of the big differentiators over time is how you actually work. It might be the differentiator over time. And so I think to the market, RXBAR will be multi-brand and global, but internally, I think what you'll see is some best operating practices that are pretty common in tech that are not as widely adopted in food. So you'd see, if you're on the inside, you would see that we work in a way that's very different from a traditional big food company.
Awesome, good. Well, I think we'd love to open the floor up to you all. Hopefully there's some questions. We will have a mic that is going to be passed around. So you get 2 seconds for a breather. And so if anyone has a question, Megan, we've got one here in this row.
Is there any kind of story around that amazing iced tea commercial?
Maybe explain what it is.
Do you mean just, so the iced tea commercial, so iced tea, if you haven't seen him, if you're on Instagram or Facebook, it looks like you're just looking at a bar, and then he kind of comes out of it and says something witty, and then goes back into the bar. It's like a little door. The idea was that we wanted the product to be front and center, which it is in those ads, and then we wanted to take the same approach to advertising that we've taken to the packaging. So we say no BS on the packaging, and that's kind of a filter for the company in terms of the way we work. But then also when we think about advertising, we wanted it to be true to that and sort of shine some light on some things. Like, I don't know if you've seen the AdWords that we're running with you guys, but it's like, you searched paleo, here's an RXBAR ad. And just things like that where it's like very, sort of in your face in the way that we're doing it. Yeah.
So obviously Google is a big data company. Can you talk about how you guys use data internally to move forward, develop strategies, think about product innovation?
Yeah, so we use data. The data that we try really hard, and this is one of the more challenging things with scale, that we try really hard to build muscles internally for, is actually subjective data. So one of the biggest learnings that we ever had was when we would sample with customers, and they would eat the product, and depending on how they would react, that would tell us a lot. And so one of the times that I remember most vividly, Peter and I were demoing at a condo association meeting in River North. And a condo association meeting is like 6 people. So we were like, tells you like we would literally demo anywhere. But we were like trying different lines on people. We'd say like real food protein bar, whole food protein bar, no added sugar, gluten-free, whatever. And you could just watch people react or not react to these lines. And so now we get more of that data than ever because we have field teams out interacting with people all the time. So that's one of the things that we're focused on, really figuring out how do we scale that behavior, because ultimately our products need to fill a void, and we need to communicate in a way that the people who eat them, that it resonates with. And so that's one form of data. And then we also do a pretty good job of managing our independent business, so like the CrossFit gyms, using data in terms of what do we expect them to be selling, are they buying, are they using the right flavors. So it's not super complicated data, but it's one of the ways that we manage a business with thousands of distribution points. So, yeah, yep.
Hi, I heard that you were responsible for getting into Whole Foods. Could you tell a little bit about that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I was. I mean, the product is really responsible for most of it. But so the process for Whole Foods, when we were selling into Whole Foods, it was broken into regions, and so we would have to call on every single region. So there's SoCal, there's NorCal, there's Pac Northwest, Rocky Mountain, Texas, on and on and on. And so you'd have to sell into each one of those Whole Foods regions. And so our journey within Whole Foods went region to region. And it started in the Northeast. A guy named John Lawson saw the product and understood it immediately and was like, hey, we've got to have you in our region. And then there were some regions, there was one region that wouldn't take us because it said no BS. And she said, I have too many evangelical Christians in my territory, I can't take you. And we were like, I think they'll be fine, but you know your customer better than we do. So Whole Foods was really like a region by region kind of thing, and now they do a lot more national buying. But back then it was a regional sell-in, and so you'd have to go in and pitch to the buyer, and then 6 months later they would reset it.
So we know which products you have, and I'm sure you can't really speak to the products that are coming soon, but what are some examples of products that you guys have brainstormed in the past that didn't make it, and why did they not make it?
Or flavors.
So from a flavor standpoint, we've tried almost everything under the sun. Products that so once the bar took off, and so the packaging changed, and once we went into retail, the business like shot up really fast. And so honestly, during that period, we brainstormed things, but we really were like, we have to execute this, which was no small feat because we have to make, a physical thing. Like, we have to make lots of bars, right? And they need to be consistent. So during that phase, we were honestly just like, let's just make sure we execute the adult bar. And then the kids bar was an opportunity that came after that. But there wasn't a lot in that time frame that we said no to because we were just totally focused on executing the core business. So there's always stuff that we're playing with. I wouldn't say anything's ever like shut down because it's always, maybe there's like an ingredient barrier. So for us, because our promise is on the front of the label in terms of the ingredients that we'll use, we have a relatively constrained innovation map because we can't add just anything to the product, right? So we have to some extent, we have to innovate within a relatively narrow set of ingredient options. So everything that's in the market right now is what we've gotten close to. Like we've made it work once we know it's gonna go, but anything else we're sort of like playing with still. Sorry if that was super vague.
So curious, in the beginning you said you were at a home security company, but you felt that there were so many learnings you could take to a food company.
Yeah.
What were those?
So LiveWatch Home Security is the name of the company, and it's now been rebranded as Brinks. So the company that owns Brinks, the armored trucks, and the security is who bought LiveWatch. So the way that we built LiveWatch was, at the time, very, very cutting edge for that industry. So the way the home security industry works is the business is constrained by the installer. So if you think about a traditional business where an installer has to go out to the home and put up the sensors and everything, that business is constrained by the number of homes that installer can go to in a day. So like the growth of the business is literally like number of installers times homes they can get to, and that's all they can do. And so we took the approach of taking the installer out of the business. And so what we did was we built in those days it was called a DIY system, but we wouldn't call it that because DIY scares people away. It was just a home security system that you would install yourself. And so immediately we were a national direct-to-consumer home security business instead of having to buy trucks and hire installers and all of that stuff. And the way that we went to market was we used digital. So 95% of our spend was through Google. And then we managed our pipeline with email. And we did it in a way that was, we basically, so we had an inside sales team that would call and help people customize their system, close the sale, and then we had a team that would ship it out. So what we tried to do was to scale that inside sales team through email, because we thought, if you're a great home security sales rep on our team, what are you doing well? And ultimately it came down to you're following up with relevant information at the right time, and usually through email, because most people don't want a call from a salesperson at 9 a.m. on a Thursday because they're working. And so we used email, and it was plain text, personalized, and what it was meant to do was to scale that inside sales team. And so we had done two things that were pretty innovative. One, we took the installer out so we could scale fast right away. And then the second thing was we lowered our cost of acquisition because our conversion rate, the number of leads that a salesperson could work themselves was 10x what you'd be able to without this great email engine that we built. And so I thought, if you guys are selling in the CrossFit space, there's actually a good opportunity to use digital marketing and email and put an inside sales team in it. And we could scale the business through that channel instead of going right into retail. And scaling in those channels meant that we were more profitable than we would have been going through distribution. Our cash flow is much better because if you go through a distributor, you're usually net 30, net 45, net 60 terms, whereas someone paying with a credit card is paying you, net -1 basically. And so we talked about it and we thought, boy, some of those same principles could be applied here to this food company. And what was exciting about it was the same thing at LiveWatch, which was no one else was doing it. And so everybody, why another bar, right? It's such a crowded category. Well, actually, we weren't in the category. We were just selling to CrossFit gyms, and there were no bars at CrossFit gyms. Mm-hmm. Or we were selling straight to your home, and we were reaching you through a paid ad or on Instagram through influencers. And we couldn't use influencers in the home security business because no one wants to post about their home security business or about their home security system. But we could use influencers really effectively for food. And we were on the total cutting edge of influencer marketing. No one was doing it when we were doing it. So those were kind of the core things that we could translate from home security to food. I'll tell you guys a funny story. My wife is in the audience, and so our influencer strategy was literally like me laying in bed, direct messaging people on Instagram. And so in our space, there's a lot of it's health and foodies, right? And so there's a lot of really good looking fit women in this space. So I'm laying in bed next to my wife, DMing all these really good looking fitness women. And she's like, what are you doing?
All right, we probably have time for one or two really quick ones, I think. One. Mike.
This is kind of a specific question, but could you talk about dates for a second? And just I remember that's kind of my first question that I had when I first tried an RXBAR, and never really grew up with dates.
Yeah.
And specifically, I wonder if what the supply chain looked like for dates, especially as you grew and scaled, whether you had an impact on the date industry or date farmers.
Yeah.
It's had an impact on them too.
Yeah. We're talking about date the fruit, right? Okay. So in the U.S., basically 100% of dates are grown in the Coachella Valley in Southern California. And actually one of the things while we were scaling, this is in 2017, I think, we used to just call date farmers and say, hey, we need a truckload of dates or whatever it was. And then we picked up the phone and we tried to place our order, and they were like, that's too many. We don't have, and we were like, oh my God, we've outgrown the US date supply. And that was a huge eye opener for us. We'd never even really thought about it. And so one of the things that we knew but was hit home for us is that dates are an agricultural product that is harvested. So it's not like eggs where hens lay eggs all the time. Dates get harvested once a year. And you either have enough dates for the year or you don't. And so when that happened, we realized there's no more supply in the US. So we just had to broaden the way that we look at that raw material. And so we expanded our sourcing beyond the US, and we've had to be really thoughtful about where they come from and who we work with. But the date industry in particular was one where we first felt a pinch on raw materials.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, I think that's our time today. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here.
Thank you.